Hello my dear friends, you're in the Military Summary channel, and today we will discuss the situation in Ukraine on the 2nd of November of 2023. Today we have a lot of very interesting updates, so let's start. First we're going to start not with the battle on the ground, but from Zelenskyy, the president of Ukraine. Today Zelenskyy on his official channel, Telegram channel, published his own post. He was talking about very difficult situation on the ground. He was talking about that Ukrainian soldiers continue their fight and so on. And there was one important note, and he also reported at the noon time and on the 2nd of November that the Russians made another attempt to attack the Ukrainian positions at Vuhledar. Also, he added that the Russians were defeated, that Ukrainians managed to stop the Russians, and that the Russians, as a result of those clashes, lost dozens of armored vehicles and personnel. Of course, that was a very loud note, very loud report, but at, let's say, at noon time, we haven't received any updates, any geolocations, any videos from this area, so that was pretty weird. But later we start receiving updates, and the most important updates were coming not from the area of Vuhledar, but from the area of Mykilske. But before we start discussion, of course, I'll remind you one important thing, that this area from the Ukrainian side is under protection of few brigades. The 72nd Mechanized Brigade with a skull on the shield, this very old brigade, it's old school brigade that wasn't redeployed from this area. They are staying here. They've been staying here since the creation of this front line. Maybe some parts took part in the battle for Kupiansk in Bakhmut direction, but mainly this brigade is located here for since the beginning of the special military operation. Another brigade that operates in this area is 79th Air Assault Brigade. This brigade mainly take control and responsible for Marinka and Krasnogorovka direction. Also, we can find in this area 55th Artillery Brigade, very powerful, one of the most experienced, and probably thanks to this brigade, if we can call it like this, the Ukrainians managed to repel the storming operations against Vuhledar during the previous period of special military operation. And of course, there is a 109th Territorial Defense Brigade. So these four brigades are the base of defense in this area. And one more time, I'll remind you that the Russians, according to Zelenskyy, according to updates before local time at noon time, the Russians on the 2nd of November launched the fourth attempt to attack and to storm Vuhledar. Before we start discussing the videos, the Russian sources also published very interesting information, and we got this post somewhere at 6 p.m. of the local time, and according to the Russian very reliable sources, we got a piece of information that during the previous 24 hours, the Russians launched probably Iskander against the Ukrainian headquarters of the 72nd Mechanized Brigade in the vicinity of the village by the name of Avdiivka. And as a result of that attack, lots of forces, manpower, armored vehicles were destroyed. And the Russians, one more time, had the headquarters or command center or concentration of forces of 72nd Mechanized Brigade, which is the base of defense in this area. And after that, we start receiving updates from the Ukrainian side. First video we got from Mykilske, the city, the village that located on the southeast of Vuhledar, on the south of Vodiane. On this video, of course, that video was published by the Ukrainian forces, so that's why we won't see the Russian offensive operation with significant breakthroughs and so on. We can see just abandoned and destroyed Russian armored vehicles in Mykilske, in the village of this front line. But there are a few important things that you need to note. First of all, as we can see, the Russians destroyed armored vehicles were spotted and discovered on the northeastern part of Mykilske, not somewhere in the south of Vuhledar in the vicinity of Pavlovka, not in the western part of Mykilske, but on the eastern part of Mykilske, and that was also the second weird thing about that operation. So this video is geolocated. There is no any doubts that this event, that the Russians tried to attack from this area, and that a lot of armored vehicles were destroyed. So the question I have: what was the Russian plan? Where the Russian tanks were heading, and where the Russians were planning to attack, and which bridgehead the Russians were planning to capture? And to understand this this operation, to understand this front line, we need to increase, of course, the number of updates at least since the beginning of October. And if we increase them, we're going to see the configuration of the front line. And basically, according to updates since the beginning of October, we see at least two areas of concentration of Russian forces. The first area of Russian concentration took place in Vuhledar, and since the beginning of October the Russians were bombing this territory heavily. The Russians were using a lot of types of weapons. The Russians were using TOS flamethrower systems. The Russians were using just the regular bombardments. The Russians were using FPV drone strikes. So the city was under very heavy fire. And we have, let's say, a video of the conditions in the city. Anyway, no matter the Russian bombardments, anyway, we see completely correct fortress, stronghold that Ukrainians can use for many, many days. And I don't think that even if the Russians started offensive operation in this direction, they would be able to capture this territory. I don't think so. So this is the first area of Russian concentration. The second area of Russian concentration took place, is located a little bit to the east from Vuhledar, and we are talking about these three lines. We've been discussing this area since probably the beginning of this summer, because the Russians was very over concentrated. We also got significant number of geolocated videos how the Russians were bombing, trying to destroy the Ukrainian artillery positions, the Ukrainian mortar positions, the concentration of Ukrainian forces along the trenches, the movements of Ukrainian armored vehicles. So basically, when talking about all these videos, we can understand and we can see that this is not just regular artillery bombardments. This is a real artillery preparation before further offensive operation in this direction. So obviously the Ukrainians destroyed, and the position of destroyed and abandoned armored vehicles of Russian Federation on the eastern part of Mykilske explains currently is correct and logical, because the Russians were planning to attack exactly these three lines. So let's return back to the 2nd of November, and if we reduce the number of days till 1 day, we got another important icon with this AK-47, which according to the legend of military summary means offensive operation. From Vuhledar direction, we got video of Russian attempt of storming Ukrainian trenches and positions. This video was added on map softly. I'm trying to say that the author of this video told us that this video was made somewhere on Vuhledar direction, and there are very high chances that this video took place not in this area, but just the chances. But anyway, as you can see, there is a tree line, the Russian movements of tanks, and this video appeared, at least I saw this video just today. So if we combine all these things together, maybe this is the exact Russian offensive operation on Vuhledar direction, which Zelenskyy described in his post, and so on. So what about this operation and the general plan? So one more time, the Russians, after artillery preparation of the three lines that located on the northeast of Mykilske, tried to storm this area with a significant number of armored vehicles, tanks and personnel. So basically the Russians concentrated further forces somewhere in the south, on the south of Mykilske. They didn't concentrate their forces in Mykilske because they didn't want to discover the real direction of attack, because the Russians were bombing and either Vuhledar and these three lines to stretch the Ukrainian focus and not to give them information till the final second where exactly the Russians were planning to attack. Because if the Russians were bombing just Vuhledar, of course the Ukrainians would concentrate their forces there. If the Russians were bombing just three lines, of course the Ukrainians would concentrate their forces there. But because of bombardments of entire front line, the Ukrainians were forced to stretch their forces from one city to another. So the Russians started their movement. The Russians bypassed the river. They entered the northern part of Vuhledar, and in this area the Russians took a decision, maybe they just got an order to turn not to the left but to turn to the right, and the Russians started their movement in this direction, where they got into some ambush, and as a result of artillery strike they lost significant number of armored vehicles on the edge of the city. But some armored vehicles managed to bypass this territory. The Russians got the closest tree line, and after that they started their movement to the north. And That's it. So we don't know anything else, how exactly that attack from the Russian side ended, but this is the only thing that we got by, let's say, 8 p.m. of the local time from this bridgehead. The only thing we can understand the Russian purposes and the reasons of the Russian attack, and obviously according to geography of Russian direction, we understand that the main thing and the main purpose, the main goal that the Russians are trying and planning to achieve is to establish control over these three lines and over this foothold. If the Russians are able to do this, of course, the first thing the Russians will be able to do is they will cut the supply roads that goes from Vodiana to Vuhledar. I'll remind you that during the previous months, during the October as well, the Russians twice attacked the bridge between Konstantinovka and Mariinka, and as a result of those strikes, that bridge was taken off. So currently the Ukrainians don't have support and supply of Vuhledar direction and South Donetsk direction through this road. So basically this road is no longer safe and the Ukrainians can't use it. So this is the operation. Furthermore, don't forget that currently the Russians are trying to storm Novomykhailivka, and today we got another video how the Russians were bombing this city with village, or the things that rest from the village, with FAB bombs, and maybe the Russians destroyed another positions, concentrations. Furthermore, we got updates that the Russians are trying to develop their offensive operation further in direction of these trenches and strongholds. So now we see the entire picture. So let's add another polygon. So this is another plan, another goal of the Russians on Novomykhailivka direction. So according to these two directions, according to these two attacks, we understand that if the Russians are able to develop further their offensive operation on the south of Novomykhailivka, further to the northwest in direction of Konstantinovka, if the Russians are able to establish control over these three lines that located on the south of Vodiana, obviously this entire area will be collapsed automatically, and the Russians will be able to capture or encircle the Ukrainian forces who are currently located there. So this is the operation to attack and encircle the Ukrainian forces, the Ukrainian positions among the fields, with two attacks, one from the south of Novomykhailivka and the second one on the north of Vuhledar. According to the Ministry of Defense of Russian Federation, as a result of clashes in this area, the Ukrainians lost 165 soldiers, 14 armored vehicles including 7 tanks and 4 artillery systems. We're going to receive more updates during the upcoming night, and I hope that by tomorrow morning we're going to receive more details and some clarification regarding the battle of the south of Donetsk. I'm not saying that the Russians are winning, but I'm also not saying that the Ukrainians are winning. The only thing we know that during the first wave of attack, the Ukrainians managed to deal some damage to the Russians and they lost some armored vehicles, but we saw the same story in Avdiivka, and no matter the losses in Avdiivka, currently the Russians have initiative and their continued encirclement of this fortification and stronghold. So maybe South Donetsk is repeating the same story. When talking about Avdiivka and Donetsk direction, the Russians continue their offensive operation. We got a lot of updates, and the most important updates that the Russians entered a new phase of the storming operation of Avdiivka. During the first two or one phase, the Russians were using just infantry and tanks to attack the Ukrainian positions, and basically the Russians were demining and clearing fields using their own armored vehicles, and that was the reason of very heavy losses from the Russian forces. But now the Russians changed their tactics, and today, for example, we got at least few videos how the Russians were trying to demine the fields between Ukrainian positions and the Russian positions with tanks that equipped or upgraded with this clearing demining equipment. On this video we see the movement of Russian tank. The Russians were demining the mine fields and they completed their mission successfully. Then they turn and return back on their base. So this is the first video. So basically if we add some arrows, the Russians were moving like this, and they made a hook and returned back safely in direction of Krasnogorovka. So that was like the demining operation, at least on this part of the front line. Another video we got between Krasnogorovka and Terikon. There is a very heavy explosion, as you can see, and this video was published by the Ukrainian sources, and the Ukrainians are saying that that was the explosion of Ur-77 distant demining equipment. So this is like Zmei Gorynich. Ur-77 is the specialized Russian equipment to demine the the areas in a distance, not like the tank that with demining equipment that can demine mines below him, but this is the equipment that can attack in a distance and destroy everything that around the area of explosion or something like this. So we see that at least 2 demining equipment were brought close to the combat line, but as we discussed a few videos ago, the Ukrainians have priority in targets, and the first target in priority is either TOS flamethrower systems and demining equipment. And if Ukrainians see this equipment on the ground, they send everything they have with one purpose, no matter the cost, no matter the price, no matter the losses they have, to destroy demining and TOS flamethrowers equipment. And as we can see, currently the Ukrainians are pretty well successful in this using this approach. The Russians also published some video. We see that recently we had the main battles that took place in the vicinity of Kherson. We had the main battles that took place along this tree line. We had a lot of geolocations from this tree line, but now the main geolocations are coming from the Ukrainian side of the railways, or at least from the railways. On this video we can see how the Russians managed to discover another Ukrainian Bradley, and as a result of strike the Ukrainian Bradley was successfully destroyed by the Russian forces. And this event took place, as you can see, along the railways. Another video we got right in front of let's say a chemical plant and Kherson. On this video we see during the night the Ukrainians tried to send 2 Bradleys that were moving along the railways, and as a result of attack the Ukrainian lost 2 Bradleys in this area. Another video along the railways. If we increase the number of updates at least from the 1st of November, I'll remind you that, for example, yesterday also on the Ukrainian side we got the video destroyed Leopard and 3 Bradleys as well. So during the previous 2 days we got at least one of 7 confirmed and geolocated destroyed Ukrainian vehicles on the northern part of Avdiivka. So and by the way, we stopped receiving videos of destroyed Russian armored vehicles on this direction. So maybe they managed to break entire situation, completely establish control over initiative, and nobody knows what is going to be next. I'm talking about the Ukrainians. Also, we got just one more time to remind you that the Russians are saying that they managed to develop their positions in direction of Novokalinovo ceramic, but yet we haven't received even a single geolocated confirmation of that. Also, when talking about the southern direction, we got update from Rybory, the Russian military expert. I believe you're familiar with him. And according to his, I can't call these other way fairy tales, the Russians almost managed to establish control over entire Avdiivka. As you can see, there is a very huge progress on the south, and according to Rybory, I'm not saying that he's lying, I'm not saying that he's speculating, maybe he has some insights, because you know that people are saying that we know the situation that took place on the ground 2 days ago, and because of all this intelligence stuff, because of this security, informational security, the sources on the ground published the video that took place in events 2 days ago. So according to, maybe Rybory has the freshest information. According to him, as a result of clashes, the Russians managed to establish control over these blocks, over this let's say cloud, and the Russians managed to get very close to Severne. The Russians managed to get and to take positions right in front of the Black Khimik of Avdiivka, so there are less than 2 kilometers left. So significant progress according to Rybory. So let's wait, let's see, because if he's giving us correct information, within the next few days we're going to receive geolocated video confirmation of this progress. For now we don't have them, but so that's why we will keep this map as is without any changes. According to the Ministry of Defense of Russian Federation, as a result of clashes on Donetsk direction, the Ukrainians lost 115 soldiers, 14 armored vehicles, including 1 tank and 8 Bradleys. So we got geolocation. So as I understand, the Ministry of Defense provided us correct information, at least regarding the losses of armored vehicles. We can't check and to understand the numbers of losses among the personnel. Another important thing, that Ukrainians lost 4 artillery systems systems on this direction as well. Now we're moving further to Vremivka tactical bridgehead. We got some updates as well. The Russians continue their counter-offensives. We got the video how the Russian forces, 10 minutes video, how the Russian forces were trying to capture the trenches in the vicinity of Staromayorska, and they were pretty successful. So the Russians also increased some pressure, and I believe that in a few days we're gonna understand the real purposes of the Russian attack. Maybe they want to return control over the Vremivka tactical bridge. We'll see. Now we're moving to Zaporizhzhia direction, and we got also a lot of updates. As you can see, a lot of icons with FPV drone strikes and destroyed Ukrainian armored vehicles in this area. The Russians reported that as a result of clashes on Zaporizhzhia direction, the Ukrainians lost 100 soldiers, 6 armored vehicles, and 2 artillery systems. And these videos, not like of today, maybe some of them took place yesterday, but the main picture and the main thing is that Ukrainians were defeated one more time. Yes, when talking about like progress on the ground, the Ukrainians managed to improve their positions, and during the previous week they established full control over these trenches, and now they got a little bit closer to Kupiansk and Novoprokopovka. But when talking about the, let's say, the material part, we see that Ukrainians lost significant number of armored vehicles just for another few hundreds of square meters, not even maybe kilometers. On this video we can see another concentration of Ukrainian forces. The Ukrainians managed to bring some Bradleys, some Leopards, they managed to land their infantry, and they abandoned the equipment because the Ukrainians understand everything that enters Robotyne, enters this field, should forget that you can use the same vehicles for evacuation. Leave every hope you who enter Robotyne fields, obviously. So this is exactly the story. So they entered, and Ukrainians understand that no chances to return back on the same vehicles, and they abandoned them and took control over the trenches around this area. And currently they're trying to dig in deeper to prepare positions, to prepare forces, and maybe to prepare themselves before further offensives in this area. The Russians destroyed significant number of armored vehicles on this area, Bradleys, Leopards, tanks, everything. And probably for the first time since the beginning, since the creation of this frontline, or not this frontline, but since the creation of Verbova frontline, we haven't received even a single geolocation or update from the fields between Robotyne and Verbova. So there were no attempts from the Ukrainian side to attack these positions. Now we're moving further to Kherson direction, and we got a lot of very interesting updates. The Ukrainians, nobody believed, obviously, but somehow the Ukrainians managed to cross Dnipro River. They managed to do this silently, probably, and silently they managed to improve their positions, and silently they managed to establish some foothold. As a result of clashes on this area, the Ukrainians lost 30 soldiers and 5 armored vehicles. And we continue receiving more and more confirmed geolocations. On this video we can see a very huge Ukrainian assault team that were moving from one part of Krymki to another. This is 100% geolocated fresh video, not of the previous year or not of the previous century. This event, this exactly transferring of troopers from one side to another, took place maybe yesterday. One more time about the lag in timings we discussed at the beginning of this video. So this area, this part of Krymki is under complete Ukraine control. The Russians understand the critical situation, and they managed to bring some TOS flamethrower systems to the combat line. And during the previous 24 hours, the Russians were bombing this territory heavily, trying to destroy as much as possible Ukrainians, trying to do everything they can, but to force the Ukrainians to step back. Also, the Russians managed to discover the entire configuration of Ukrainian plan. So it's not enough to bomb the shore, the bank of Dnipro River. The Russians also started bombardments of the village by the name of Tyaginka. And as you can see, according to this video, the Russians were bombing the shore, the bank of this lake, because this is the area where the Ukrainians are packing on their boats and moving further. So the Ukrainians are using the next tactic. They concentrate their forces somewhere in this area. They have some concentration, some camps, some temporary positions. They're using boats from this area, and they're moving along Tyaginka River, so very far from the Russian position, so they can feel themselves pretty secure while packing on the boat, while getting on board. And then they're moving in this area, and this is the Ukrainian landing position. So this entire area where they have concentration, some trenches, some probably temporary fortifications, and from this area, from this concentration, every single day they're sending more and more reserves and reinforcements in Krynki for rotation process, for replacements, for evacuation of wounded. So this is the Ukrainian configuration of attack. So to slow down and to force the Ukrainians to step back, the Russians need to attack Krynki itself with tall flamethrower systems. The Russians need to bomb with FAB or mortar and artillery systems. It's better to use cluster rounds, but the Russians are not using this type of weapon. They shore the bank of Dnieper River, and of course to use FAB and artillery systems against Yaginki to attack the concentration and the boats, like positions, parking for boats or something like this. Another interesting things, updates are coming from another city, another village from this area, and I'm talking about Kherson from this area. If we increase the number of updates since the beginning of October as well, we're gonna see the Ukrainian concentration of fire. For example, today the Ukrainians published another video how the Russian armored vehicle was moving along the streets, among the ruins, and as a result of probably FPV drone strike or maybe of mine or something like this armored vehicle was damaged. So we see this is the same pattern as we saw in Vuhledar from Russian side. The Russians during the months were bombing those 3 lines in Vuhledar, and then they launched offensive operation. The Ukrainians have problems with artillery systems, well, artillery rounds, but the Ukrainians don't have problems with FPV drones and regular grenades. So they don't have classical artillery preparations as the Russians have, but they have drone preparation. And during October, the Ukrainians were very concentrated. So as the Russians attacked Vuhledar, those 2 lines, I expect another attempt to attack from the Ukrainian side this village as well. And of course, the Ukrainians will try to make another landing operation somewhere in this area. And furthermore, we got more evidence of this upcoming operation. And the main evidence is the Russian bombardments of these cities. And as you can see, the Russian focus was very heavy during October. I can't even imagine the number of Ukrainian forces that currently are concentrated on this line. Obviously, we're going to see another bloody attempt from the Ukrainian side, but we see the current situation with the Russians. I have like 2 opinions, 2 options. Maybe the Russians are trying to create this like vision and opinion to the Ukrainians that everything is so bad that they have changed the commander of this direction, that they can't force the Ukrainians to step back. Maybe they have something like a plan to force the Ukrainians to think like that. And when the Ukrainians send the major part of their forces, they will destroy everything during that operation, and they will collapse the entire front line from the Russians, from the Ukrainian side. Maybe, who knows? And we will finish this video with Kupiansk, Liman front lines. So we will bypass Bakhmut, Avdiivka. There were just regular clashes, nothing important. On Kupiansk, Liman, we don't have also nothing, anything important. The only video from Nevska, the FAB bombardments of another Ukrainian positions in this village. And we're watching and I'm showing this video because of video that we got yesterday. This is another area of Russian concentration. One more time, if we increase the number of days since the 1st of November, we're going to see that the Russians are bombing this line, the main supply roads, the main warehouses, ammo depots, and maybe the Russians are not going to attack in November because we don't have this concentration in October. The Russians need at least a month to destroy everything. So maybe this is the beginning of upcoming offensive operation that is going to take place in December. It's possible, really possible. And we will finish with Kupiansk direction. We got a lot of updates from this area as well. The Russians continue offensive operation, trying to cut the main road between Petropavlovka and Orlyanka. More tanks. The Ukrainians are sending more tanks in this direction. The Russians destroy everything that comes in this area. So we're gonna see more updates as well. And the Russians destroyed using Lancet FPV drone, Ukrainian armored vehicle or personal carrier behind Stepovo Novoselka. So the Russians also very concentrated in this area, and as I understand, we're going to receive more updates from this bridgehead. Also, the Russians activated in the vicinity of Sinkovka. Just for the previous 24 hours, we got at least 2 geolocated videos how the Russians were bombing the edge Ukrainian positions in the city, in the village, and this might be also like artillery preparation before further attempt of the Russian forces to attack in this direction. So we'll see. But when talking about the losses during the previous 24 hours for Kupiansk and Liman front line, the Ukrainians lost for 2 front lines just 60 soldiers. It's nothing, of course, but the level of losses among artillery systems was very heavy. 1 Uragan, 1 Grad, 2 Krab, 1 S-90, 1 Gvozdika, 2 D-30. So the Russians during the previous 24 hours mainly were concentrated on counter-artillery duels, but not on the clashes on the ground. And that's it for today. Military Summary channel reminds you to condemn any violence in the world. Thank you for watching, subscribe to my channel, put your likes to my Patreon, and have a good day. Bye bye.